Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
We are learning Mishna Nedarim, Perek Gimel, Chapter 3, Mishnah 4. Arba Nedarim. There are four types of Nedarim. Hitiru Chachamim. The Chachamim permitted. Permitted means to say, the Chachamim that we understand, the Chachamim determined that when you make these kind of Nedarim, you don't need to go to a Beis Din to annul it. We know that they're not, that you didn't mean to make them Nedarim, let's put it that way. They're automatically invalid. That's what it means, hitiru. The Chachamim said it's permissible. That means they immediately invalidated. They automatically said, nothing to talk about. Even though it sounds like a neder, sounds like you're making a neder, it is not a valid neder. Now, the Mishnah lists the four types of nedarim, and then the Mishnayos will elaborate on them. The first example is called Nidre Zeruzin, which they translate as Nedarim of persuasion, which are intended to serve only as means of persuasion and not as real Nedarim. The Nidre Havai, that they translate as Nedarim of exaggeration, which again are not meant to be taken literally. The Nidre Shkogais, Nedarim of mistakes, as the name says, they were based on a mistake. The Nidre Anosim, and the Nedarim of unavoidable circumstances, which involve conditions that are outside a person's control. Basically, all these are Nedarim, and the Chachamim said it is understood by us, and it's clear that there is not full intent in making these Nedarim, and therefore they are not effective, and you don't have to go to a Beis Din to annul them. Let me read you here from the notes. The reason these Nedarim are invalid is that they are made without intent to actually create a prohibition. It is not enough for someone to say the words of a neder. He must also have intent for it, which in the terminology for that is piv v'libay shavin. His mouth and his heart are the same. That means that he really has intent for what he's saying. If he does not have the required intent, the neder is ineffective. So in these cases, the rabbis decree that although these nedarim do not take effect, okay, now 1 second. Now this interesting point that they bring in here. The rabbis decree that although these nedarim do not take effect, a person is forbidden to take one of them unless he plans to keep it. That's what they bring down here from the Tiferes Yisrael. So again, they were matir, they permitted it. That means to say it's not a neder, but it is not something you're allowed to do. It's something that is forbidden to do. Okay, if you're not planning on keeping it, then don't say it. If at the end of the day you did say it, we understand that you don't have intent for it really to be effective, and therefore they are not going to be effective. And as the wording is, Hitiru Chachamim, they permitted it, which means you don't even have to go to a Beis Din to annul it. All right. So now, Nidre Zeruzin Ketzad. What is the example of the neder of persuasion? How does that work? So it goes like this. We're talking about two people who are haggling over something. You got a buyer and a seller, and they're haggling over the price. So Ketzad, Hayamoicher Chayfetz, person was selling an object, V'amar, and he said to the buyer, Kainam sheni paychas lacha min hasela, which means my loaf of bread. Kainam means that's the wording when you want to link something to make it forbidden, because that kainam is a substitute word for carbon. So he was saying carbon, which means he's saying, my loaf of bread should be like a carbon to me. She'eni paychas lacha min hasela. I am not going down on the price of this object less than a sela. A sela is 4 dinarim. So in order to tell the buyer, the seller says to the buyer, I am not going down from this price. So to really make emphasis on it, he says that if this piece of bread should be a carbon to me, that I don't go down on the price of a seller, which means if I go down the price of a seller, this bread should become forbidden to me. So he's trying to tell the buyer, I'm not going down any further. And if I do go down any further, then this bread of mine should become kainam, should become forbidden to me like a carbon. That's what he said to the buyer. V'halo eimer, and the buyer says to him, oh yeah? Kainam sheni meisif l'cha shekel. My loaf of bread should be kainim, so that I don't pay you more than a shekel. A shekel is 2 dinarim. Okay? So the buyer says, I'm not going up more than 2 shkalim, and if I do, my bread should be a carbon. So this one says, if I go down less than 4, my bread is forbidden to be like a carbon. That's the seller. The buyer says, if I go above a seller, which is 2 dinarim, half the price that you're mentioning, if I go above that, if I would pay that, then my bread should be forbidden to me. Okay? So what happens then? Shneyem writes in Mishloisha dinarim. Everybody knows that they mean to come to an agreement of 3 dinarim. They know that they're not, meaning we know they're not serious. It's a form of haggling. It's a form of haggling over a price. The seller says, if I go down more than 4, if I go less than 4, my bread should be forbidden to me. And the buyer says, if I go above a seller, my bread should be forbidden to me. Okay? Now at the end of the day, we understand, says the Mishnah, that they're paying 3. They want to come to an agreement of 3. Oh, but what do you mean? This guy made a neder that if I go less than 4, my bread should be forbidden. And that guy says if I go above a shekel, which is 2 dinarim, my bread should be forbidden. Are their breads forbidden? Absolutely not. Because we understand that the whole purpose of the neder, of each one making a neder, was to persuade the other one, this is my final offer, so to speak. But we all know what that means. We all know that they're going to come to an agreement of 3. So this is the example of a neder of persuasion. We understand that even though, now typically, very often there's a principle called Dvarim Shabbalei V'Einam Dvarim. If I basically say something and I'm talking about making some kind of obligation or whatever it may be, and my words, basically say one thing, and you come back and you say, I meant this. That's called Dvarim Shabbalei. That's words in the heart. That doesn't count. They don't work. And we actually go with what you say. But by the Nedarim, in these cases of the Nedarim, we don't say that. We don't say that, you said 4. Oh, I really meant 3. You didn't say that. It's Dvarim Shabbalei. Those are words of the heart. You never said that. You said 4. The answer is, we know what you mean. And if we know what you mean, then the Dvarim are not Shabbalei. These are not matters. These are not words of the heart. Everybody knows this is a form of haggling. Everybody knows what they really mean, and that they don't really mean to make meaning each one is really going to say afterwards, okay, that's the point. The point is that the fact that it's right, the fact that they really mean 3 isn't Dvarim Shabbalei, isn't considered words of the heart, because we understand that's what they mean, and we understand that the Nedarim never had the intent to be a neder, just was a form of persuasion. Okay, that's the first example. That's the Tanna Kama's example. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, the sage Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov said, now the words here don't, if you read the words, it's not, the Bartanur brings down that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is saying here 2 separate things. First, so too, if a person wants to impose a neder on another person so that the second person will eat with him. The case is like this. I'm reading to here from how they have it here. The case is that one person invited another to eat with him, but the latter refused. Okay? And the inviter then made a neder saying that he forbids the other person of any benefit for him if he doesn't eat with him. If you don't come and eat with me, then whatever I have is a carbon to you. Here too, it is clear that the inviter did not actually intend the neder to take effect, and he was using it only as a means of persuasion. That is Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. This is another example. He says this is another example of persuasion. Basically, the inviter clearly had no intent to create a prohibition, because a person would not go so far as to make his possessions prohibited to another just because the latter will not eat with him. That's what he's saying. If you don't come and eat with me, then all my possessions should be a carbon on you. It shall be forbidden on you. Says Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, we know he doesn't mean that. No one goes that far to forbid all their possessions on someone because he won't come and eat with him. So therefore, again, it's a nidrei zeruzin. It's a neder of persuasion. We know you don't mean for it to be an effective neder. Now that's Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. That means that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is saying this. That means the Tanna Kama disagrees, because the Tanna Kama did not use this as an example. According to the Tanna Kama, according to the first opinion, though, the neder does take effect, because we assume that he didn't mean what he said. According to the Tanna Kama, a person would get so upset that the other person doesn't want to accept his invitation that he would make everything forbidden to him. And therefore, we do not look at this as a neder of persuasion. We look at it as a real neder. If he comes back afterwards and he says, according to the Tanna Kama, if he comes back and he says, oh, it was just a means of persuasion, we wouldn't accept it according to the Tanna Kama. Okay, that's the first thing. The next Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov says, and by the way, the Bartanura says, the halacha is like Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov. That's number one when it comes to the first matter. The next matter is that actually we have here a separate thing. Oimer, if a person here, it means like this. If someone wants to nullify all nedarim that he might make in the future, meaning he wants to nullify all his nedarim in advance. All his nedarim, that means any neder I make, he wants to go ahead and nullify. He wants to say that it shouldn't take effect. So Oimer, the person says, again, you don't want to read the Mishnah this way, but now you got to read it as the second thing that Eliezer ben Yaakov says. Oimer, a person says, Kol neder shani asa lidar hu batal. Any vow I'm going to make in the future is nullified. And by doing that, he wants to actually make any neder he makes in the future. No. So Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov says, you can do that. You can in advance say, all my nedarim should be null, meaning any neder I make, I'm hereby declaring right now, I don't want it. I don't really mean it. I don't want it. That's going to work. But on the condition that he remembers at the time of the vow. That means, in advance, I said, any neder that I'm going to make should be null. Now, so what's that? What are you trying to do? You're trying to do that later on when, let's say, you make a vow, you're trying to say it shouldn't be. So says the Mishnah, that will work if at the time that you make that neder that you'll do in the future, that you remember that you made this nullification in advance. If you declared in advance, I don't mean it. I don't want it to work. I mean, declaring any neder I make, I'm right now hereby saying I don't really want it. If you want that declaration to work according to the wording of the Mishnah, you need to remember at the time that you make the neder that you made this condition, you made this declaration, because then it comes out that you're making the neder, and when you're making the neder, you're making it, but because you made a declaration before that you really don't want it to work, and now you have that in mind when you make the vow, that will now allow the vow not to take effect. Now you may say, so why are you making the vow? Right? You're telling me I got to remember that I didn't want it, that I made a declaration before that I don't want it. So what are you making the vow for? Right? What are you making the vow for? You're making a vow, but in mind you're saying, oh, I remember, I have in mind the declaration I made before that I don't really want it. So why are you saying it for? So the answer that's given is that he might still want to say the neder in order to make an impression on members of his family for the purpose of inspiring them to do what's right. He's making a neder because he's trying to show them that you got to take something serious. And how does he do it? By making a neder. But he doesn't really want the neder to be effective. He just wants it to be something that inspires his family. So as long as he remembers at the time that he makes the neder that he made this declaration of nullification, it's going to work. If he does not remember the declaration when he says the neder, says the Bartanura, and certainly if he nullifies the declaration, the neder takes effect. If when you make this neder, you made declaration before, but according to the wording of the Mishnah, if when you make the neder, you don't think about that nullification that you made previously, then the neder is going to take effect. So that's what the Mishnah means. The Mishnah is saying that if you make the declaration beforehand, it means you really expressed it. It's not just something in your mind. Because it only be in your mind would be Dvar Mishabalev. You actually went ahead and you made that neder. Meaning, for instance, let's say a person makes a neder and didn't make this declaration in advance. He makes a neder. And after making the neder, he says, when I made the neder, I didn't really mean it. I didn't really want it to work. Guess what? We don't accept what you're saying. That's Dvar Mishabalev. You made a neder. When you make the neder, you're making a neder. That's what we see. Oh, you're saying in my heart, I had this. Doesn't work. That what you had in your heart, we may believe you what you had in your heart, but it's not going to work. So in this case, what's happening is he's declaring beforehand that he doesn't want it. It wasn't in his heart. He said it. And therefore, if when he makes the neder itself, he has in mind what he said before, that will now work to nullify the vow that he made. But if he doesn't have it in mind when he made the vow is going to take effect. That's what the Mishnah means when it says, as long as he remembers at the time of the vow. Okay? Now, actually, let's just conclude with something here, that there's another version of the Mishnah's text, and that version goes that actually, when he makes the vow, he shouldn't remember it. Meaning, according to the other version, if when you make this vow, right, you make this vow and you remember still that you made that nullification and you still made the vow, then that means that you want the vow. So therefore, according to the other version, it has to be that you made the nullification before, then you made the vow, and you didn't remember that nullification then. Oh, so that means you didn't, that if you didn't remember the nullification then, that means you didn't nullify the nullification. And therefore, your vow won't take effect. Have a wonderful day.
How do you remember?
You better remember it.